guys. Hopefully you guys are having a great show. Thank you so much for coming through yesterday. We had a lot of love. Really appreciate all the panelists coming through to drop game. That's what we're doing here, guys. We're just trying to level each other up, challenge each other respectfully, and shout out to all of our panelists that have been on our series. This has been incredible. This is exactly what we envisioned. There's no competition here. This is all colleagues trying to collaborate and innovate. We know we don't get better if we don't challenge each other, so that's exactly what these panel discussions are for. When it comes back to what this panel is going to be about, we really want to focus on the controls and how do we get the best genetic expression in our environment. Substrate monitoring, environmental monitoring, fertigation. Can't crop steer, you can't do anything without measurements. So I think these guys have heard me preach about can't manage without measurement long enough. I think this is the panel that we've all been waiting for. We've got another panel tonight at 8 p.m. at the Nerd, which will be focused on substrates. So this is a nice precursor to that discussion as well. And that'll be at 8 p.m. over at the Nerd in downtown Las Vegas. So hopefully you guys can join us tonight. Without further ado, let's jump right into this. So the control room, the purpose of this panel is to choose the right tools for measurement, right? We all understand there's plenty of options out there. There's wonderful suppliers that you've got great relationships with. I've asked these guys to join us today because they have wonderful perspective, a lot of experience up on this panel, a lot of cultivation experience from the large-scale production perspective, quality cultivators, award-winning cultivators. This is it, guys. So the first topic that we're going to jump into is choosing the right tools to leverage advanced tools and technology. So one of the best things that we can do is lean into the supplier partners that we work with on those tools. Part of the main reason why we got these guys up here is because they're collaborative. Everyone up here definitely has been receptive to feedback, constructive criticism, and that's why we can all work together. I think that's really what this is about, guys. We want to be able to find ways to continue to collaborate and innovate. We all know that the margins are thin in packs these days. We got to maximize their genetic potential. We got to build recipes for these genetics. And I think ultimately when you start dealing with candies, right? I think we had a great crop steering discussion on small bud trait candies at last year's BizCon event. That was fun too, because ultimately we got to deal with these finicky small bud trait plants. There's a lot of different strategies we can use. Now, how do you actually bring out the best genetic potential to separate yourself from those other bulk producers? Well, another reason why we are doing this whole booth is about turning up the terps. So we had our Synganic panel session yesterday, which talked about blasting organics through the drip lines without clogging your emitters. So again, we're going to be talking about fertigation. We'll be talking about great strategies and SOPs to help contribute to these successes in building a separating factor between you and the other cultivators. Let's lead off with some introductions. My man sitting over to the right, Jason, lead us off.
Yeah, I'm loud. My name's Jason Van Leuven. I'm the Director of Applied Technology with Arroya. That's Mo.
I'm Bo Korchin. I work with AJ's Flower Company in LA, Gram Cannabis in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Big Harvest in OKC, Genix in Adelanto, a bunch of other grows. Hi.
Hey everybody, my name is Joe Cimino. I'm a cultivator currently based in Massachusetts. We're growing Your Highness right now. So.
Hey everybody, my name is Wally Benfield. I am a technical sales rep with Dosatron International. We have a fertigation controller that we really push into this, but Dosatron is probably how you know most of us.
My name is Cale Winters. I am the president of Rhythm Cultivation Solutions and Services. Rhythm CSS, we do automated fertigation systems and environmental controls.
Round of applause for our panelists, please. Thank you, guys. Next slide, please, Tony. One more slide. All right, choosing the right tools. I'm going to start us off here with Jason because from an environmental perspective, from a substrate perspective, let's touch on some of the factors of why Arroya is doing what they do in the cultivation space.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to come into cultivation with a pretty good electronics and technology background. Always been a huge fan of applying maths and sciences so that I could understand things better. And it really allows people to get insight into, one, their cultivation processes, and two, simply the plant itself. So there's obviously everyone of us in here is probably using technology that gives us insights into things that we just can't do as a human. So let's embrace that. Let's take advantage of the math, the science, the history that traditional ag has given us as far as take a step forward, help yourself get better at what you're doing. So with substrate sensors, sure, we can pick up pots. When you pick up a pot, it weighs different than when I pick up a pot, but the pot actually weighs the same amount. So there's really no reason that, one, we should be doing that as a human, because human error is going to be induced into your process when we do that. Lots of equipment out there to help you track it. If we are looking at time series EC in the substrate versus just taking a spot measurement with EC, we get way better resolution into how we can do specific crop steering, how much runoff we want to have, all the stuff that in the end gives you more product if you learn how to manipulate it.
Sensitivity is one of the biggest things that I've realized Arroyo has with a major competitive advantage. The sensitivity of the sensors are typically what we use to calibrate. And I think that's one of the things that Mo and I are always doing, which I'm fortunate enough to work with Mo once, twice a week with a couple different farms that we manage. And that's one of the things that we're always doing. How often are we calibrating our other sensors using Arroyo? So I want to throw a shout out to how you guys have really developed that, especially with the Climate One station being aspirated. I think that's one of the cool things that actually give us that trust and be able to calibrate off of that. So shout out to you guys.
Yeah, it was just really kind of a chance of luck that one, somehow I ended up doing cannabis cultivation, and then the other was that it was in a very small town where there's 1 or 2 cultivation sites, but yet the meter group who has turned into Arroyo, has turned into Adium as a company, they were local as well. And so it was just kind of just two lucky paths crossed, and within 2 months of starting at the cultivation site, I was using meter group sensors. That's actually the predecessor to the Terros 12, and so that was kind of the outline of being like, hey, these are things that, one, I didn't know enough about cultivation at the time, but I knew how to deploy sensor systems and interpret that information. And probably one of the biggest challenges was helping the entire team there utilize it as they were adjusting from more old school types of processes, getting them to embrace that technology. And here at Arroyo, that's one thing that we've really strived to do, is get more people the education on how to utilize that stuff. How do we interpret things from kind of a step back, right? What is the science that explains what's going on in the substrate? Why is that plant's morphology dictated by its physiology?
That's exactly right? We got to pay attention to the plant. Sensors tell us something, but it's up to the cultivator to analyze that and to track and log the data, which I know, Mo, you've really hammered in the data aspect, and shout out to the way you've managed the business of cultivation, because that's truly something that I admire about you. I'm honored and pleasured to have this opportunity to work together, man, because you really see cultivation as a business and being able to utilize data management. Why don't you touch a little bit on that too, please, from the tools that you're using?
Yeah, I think number one, data is the most important thing we can get, right? So we got to be able to see what's going on in the rooms, to be able to make decisions on what we need to do. I've used multiple control systems. I think, really, it's important to have a good user interface. I see a lot of control systems out there that maybe look clunkier or harder to use or navigate. So I definitely look at something that's easy for people to access. Maybe not even your cultivator, your cultivation managers, but maybe your cultivators have access to, so that they have something easy to look at continuously to see if there are any alarms or things that could be happening in the rooms that could prevent further damage to the plants or the processes in the room. It helps drive decisions every single day. So the more data you get, I think the more modular your control system can be, the more user-friendly that system is. Definitely helps with just navigating day-to-day processes and making sure that you're aware of the things that are continuously happening in the rooms, and hit the numbers.
And during the lighting discussion panel we had yesterday, that was a huge topic, was ease of use, right? Team management and actual adherence to being able to utilize these tools that we're investing into. So complex tools, I understand there's a 5-year plan, but what about the 1-year plan right now, right? I think that's why the user interface is so important, and ultimately that's what we're doing. And I'm looking at both you guys down there, because as we've been exploring a couple different UIs over the past few weeks or past month or so for PowrHouse, right? You guys have taken time with us to show us exactly how these tools work, because we're building something new where you guys have effectively, but also have the controls. So, Cale, let's start with you since we had the first pleasure of exploring the Rhythm platform, because the right tool for the job, right? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, when we started this business, we saw really who our customer base was, and put a lot of focus on the user experience. And so just to give a little bit of a foundation of who we are, we're building. Rhythm focuses on building really robust control and automation solutions using an industrial controls hardware backend, right? And so that was the world that I came out of, was big industry automation, and we saw an opportunity in cannabis to bring some of those best practices in that space, the hardware backends, the pumping systems, all of those things that we did in my past life, and bring that to the cannabis world. But really to do that and provide these really robust tools, very flexible, configurable tools, but really put a lot of focus on the user experience. Noting that our cultivators are not often, process management backgrounds. They grow plants and can be experts in that space. They have a lot of day-to-day task management stuff, but we wanted to make that a couple clicks away. Wanted to make it resonate with the cultivator in terms of the interface and how they interact with that equipment, and then provide a lot of, again, meaningful, configurable tools. All cultivators are a little bit different, or might have different needs and or expectations of a control system. So, we wanted to build a system that each cultivator could configure for their unique needs. And then ultimately provide a lot of data and analytics. We do cloud-based data and analytics. We host our software on site at facilities, but do cloud-based data and analytics. And we're logging a lot of data. We're providing really intuitive analytics tools. And again, the goal is for us to provide, listen to the cultivators ultimately, and provide, again, robust, flexible, reliable tools with user-friendly front ends that allow them to just optimize their harvest potential, but do so as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Well said. And I saw the same thing when I was working with Chris, going through the Edatron system. So, Cale, you guys shown us a lot of options, right? And this is really the fun part. Wally, why don't you elaborate a little bit on the Edatron system, because I know everybody's familiar with Dosatron and how the pumpers work, but elaborate a little bit more on Edatron so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So at Dilution Solutions, Dosatron, we also have a fertigation controller. We align with Cale on a lot of the industrial applications kind of things. We need industrial sensors, reliability, repeatability, and ease of use. Edatron has been an option that we've been utilizing along with Dosatron for many years to manage pH correction. So we've been able to use it to microdose nutrients or acids or bases into the line. We're applying that same pump that we've proven works into multiple styles of dosing systems. So we'll utilize multiple pumps, multiple systems to be able to deliver multiple recipes and have that flexibility that you really need to deliver the precision that we need on the crop.
And again, shout out to the UI, because it was super clean, very easy. Both of you guys have wonderful UI, and again, it's about what decision is the cultivation. Well, mainly, honestly, it comes back to like the ownership and who they're going to trust as running the switches, right? What is that cost factor, and how does that equate to the risk factor, or whatever the reward might be in that sense? But Joe, I would love to pick your brain a little bit on this too, because I know from a simplicity standpoint, brother, you have scaled ship back to the absolute simplest piece, and I think that's really where I would love to get your perspective on just starting from simple.
I think at the end of the day, the reason we're collecting all the data is to make good, consistent decisions and bring repeatability to our crops, right? The more we can dial in a specific strain, the more we can, get it closer to that, its potential, right? So at the end of the day, the more moving pieces, everything in life is going to fail. So at a certain point, pieces are going to fail, machines are going to fail, and that's really where I like to, keep it as absolutely simple as possible. At the end of the day, there's so many moving pieces and in cannabis, and there's so many variables that we have to control. So trying to limit the downfall or things getting out of line is really, I think, critical to success at the end of the day.
And Joe, you're I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I piggyback on that? So to Joe's point, as things fail, I feel like the future of control units is modularity, and so I think choosing a system that can be modular, that integrates with other systems, so that as needs and demands change, you have the ability to take with that and stay up to date, right? So you're with the newest technology versus something that you may get stuck with that may not have any future to, combine with new equipment that's coming out. It's expensive, right?
As the margins continue to get slimmer and slimmer, yes. As we start to look at ways to optimize our grow and the workflow ultimately, like that's one of the most difficult challenges right now is we spend time and money on collecting data from a manual runoff collection form or whatever it might be, but it makes us a lot more comfortable about the decisions that are happening the next day. So again, from an environmental perspective, this is next. Can I get the next slide, please? So this also goes back into quality and how do we maximize the genetic potential by getting strategies in place, which again, Arroyo has had the baseline of how do we continue to repeat what we deemed as a successful run, right? So managing those P2, or when you start P2s, when you're cutting P2s, I mean, all that stuff is it's essential to get the quality line above that. So Mo, can you please touch a little bit on what have been, from a newer cultivator perspective, what were the biggest things that you recognized while you were managing data and understanding the genetic potential and what you looked for to make the modifications on?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's really being able to look at a chart and being able to look at the plant and be able to visualize, you correlate what it is that you're doing, right, in substrate with your environment to see if that's actually happening, right, based on the data that's happening in the room. So, for example, if something, we're coming in with low VPDs and for some reason it wasn't drinking enough because the VPD is lower. So you can adjust your controls to your irrigation so that you're not overfeeding or drowning your plant based on what you see. So different genetics may root faster, slower. You may have to irrigate those that, in veg maybe differently than others that may drink fast.
Let's touch on that real quick because transplant, the initial intake, right? We deal with some greenhouse plants that are coming into an indoor environment. So that is probably one of the most difficult things I've ever experienced in the cultivation is trying to get those plants to acclimatize and actually root in. But that's where the irrigation strategy really came into play.
Yeah, so being able to see where intake your plants on a daily basis, see where their top max water content looks like, see what their minimum water content looks like, at what rates are they drinking. Arroyo's got some great dryback features that are able to tell you those things, that integrate with other control units that are able to make those adjustments in feed for you, or set programs to help you do that. Yeah, it's just about being able to see the trends in the lines and being able to have them talk to the controller so that you can make those adjustments and see what's actually happening in the rooms.
So a couple of other things from a fertigation perspective. Wally, let's touch on this because when you think of irrigation, you think of water movement, right? Dosatron starts to come in mind first because that's really where you guys have established yourself in the industry. So touch a little bit upon some of those strategies that Dilution Solutions has really implemented throughout the past.
Yeah, so, one of the biggest things that we see when we start bringing people into automatic fertigation is a lack of consistency. So they're hand mixing, they're mixing every week. There may be lots of tanks, lots of different things going on. And consistency is really key for those plants. So, with the irrigation, we want to make sure we get the strategies right. Water when they need water, not hit them with the wrong nutrients. We see a lot of limitations in some of the room-by-room controllers that don't have enough irrigation feed times, or they limit you in the duration. So you have to water for 2 to 5 minutes at a time, and that's not always the best thing. So given the flexibility of being able to feed what you need when you need and have that reliability of consistency and also be able to deliver it in the exact volumes you need at the right times makes a really big difference. And
I'm going to flip to the question on you now. What are the biggest challenges that you see that cultivators are dealing with when they're operating your solutions?
The biggest challenges that we see, honestly, at the end of the day, it's probably maintenance, and it's not maintenance on the injection system or the sensor equipment, but it's really irrigation lines. Irrigation lines tend to get neglected a bit. We see a lot of biofilm buildup. We see some mineral scale. And all those things can lead to pathogens downline that we've seen cause some major issues in the past.
We had a great conversation yesterday about line cleaners, whether you're going an organic line cleaner route or a hypochlorous acid route. And I want to give a round of applause real quick because Amir and Dan Wilson from Current Culture and Hygrozyme, you guys absolutely had a fantastic debate, respectfully. So round of applause for those guys, please. If you can watch that panel from yesterday, it answered a lot of questions. And then we also had a lot of discussion around dissolved oxygen because we understand that line cleaning is probably the most important factor to get our plants fed, obviously. So being able to get the delivery system there is crucial. So, Kale, let's touch on a little bit on that. From the side of Rhythm, getting water moved, getting everything into the strategy side of things, where does Rhythm put themselves in that when you're looking at Dosatron or Rhythm?
Well, I mean, when it comes to Dosatron, their Editron system is a bit of a competitive system to what we do in our inline series. We have direct injection systems, we have batch systems. We can direct feed plants, we can fill reses. There's a lot of different models, a lot of different approaches that we all take. I'm trying to understand what the growers' ideal needs are, and if they don't know, then I'm going to educate them on the ins and outs of all of that, get an understanding of their growing mediums, what are their goals, are they deploying crop steering methodologies, et cetera, and kind of try to steer them in one direction or another, or provide options and say, hey, what's the best fit? When it comes to the Dosatron injectors, we often work together. I mean, I've known Chris and Wally for a long time. We've done a lot of mutual projects. And really, at the end of the day, for Rhythm, what we provide, we've got options, first and foremost. When you talked about modularity, that's a lot of what we do. We build control systems on a industrial controls platform, and with that, there is modularity. When we build a control system, we can program it to do something. If it's got relays, that relay today might be a DHU, but we can remap it to be something else. If you have changes, if you have, we put new sensors at a facility that you're involved in, and we have these, as we learn, if there's new opportunity to change, as growers change, phasing plans change, we want to be able to build an infrastructure that allows them to the flexibility, as well as like, hey, we don't got to gut that and put in a new system. Maybe we just remap, maybe we add some controllers, network them, and bring them to life. But at the end of the day, that flexibility to allow for change and then the potential to update is a big part of what we do as well. When it comes to water movement, and I'll just say we provide, again, we work together quite a bit, but we provide, it starts with pumping systems. I'll say that, moving water throughout a facility, we've got a lot of great flexible scheduling tools. When we came into this industry, there were a lot of differences. The way that people grow today is very different than the way that people grew 8 years ago. Tools like Arroyo have had a big influence on that. Scheduling tools need to change. Our software has changed and changed and changed because the growers keep methodologies and their needs keep changing, and so we're tasked to obviously keep up with that, and so that's a big part of what we do. We provide pumping systems, and at our core, one of the things that we do a little different is we don't provide just an autonomous pumping system. Rhythm will build systems if you want to use dab pumps, liter pumps, some of these autonomous pumping systems that are out there, Grun, Foss, whatever it is, but we're going to provide you with a robust pumping system. Offer redundancy. Hey, you're not going to rely on just one pumping system. You have a backup pumping system that's built into it. It's gonna, if something were to go wrong, hey, you've got an integrated pumping system that's a backup, and then we do true dynamic control of those pumping systems. Variable frequency drives, more and more people now know what those are, but we're interfacing to those VFDs. We're telling them when to run. We're telling them at what speed, at what pressure to optimize that process. We depressurize the system after we're done feeding, so we're eliminating the need for mechanical pressure regulators, flow regulators, et cetera, throughout the system. So there's just a lot of value, and I'm probably going on a tangent a little bit with what you do, but or what you asked rather. But again, we intuitive software and tools influenced by the cultivators.
Sure.
To just ultimately allow them to optimize.
I'm going to flip the question on you as well, because when there is a challenge, I know we've had a lot of different total integrated solutions that have proprietary service requirements, or somebody that needs to come out and fix it, or maybe they have to tap into the software, and that takes time, right? Every hour that room is down, our VPD is fucked. So how do we make sure that we get to the situation of there's going to be downtime, but how do we prepare for that? Because I know, Ryan, I believe we've had that discussion over the past few years. There's systems out there that you cannot just fix on the spot, right? There's going to be situations where you need to get that service provider out. That could be 24 to 48 hours, maybe even 72 hours. Gail, maybe you can touch a little bit on that and on the serviceability, and I'll ask Wally the same question.
Yeah, so, I would start by saying this is why we offer things like redundancy. You know, and I'll have that discussion with everybody. We don't have to do a redundant pumping system, but here's the risk if you don't, right? So downtime is everything. If I have a direct feed fertigation system feeding 10 flowering rooms and you have one pump and that pump goes down, you're down. So we offer the redundancy in that. We try to build some tools that, generally speaking, will say, hey, yes, you've got a flow meter here, but I'm not going to rely on that flow meter. If the flow meter goes down, what's my backup plan? So we'll have the ability to kind of toggle things on and off in the event that those failures happen. Failures are going to happen. We can invest in the most robust hardware out there. At some point, mechanical equipment has a potential to fail and might fail, so we plan for those failures. From Rhythm's perspective, we just try to, again, offer the redundant solutions or redundant options. We have integrated software redundancy so we can deactivate or activate different things in the event of a failure. And then ultimately, you know, our solutions, your local plumbers and electricians can absolutely service and support. Now, we can log in Rhythm from our home base. We don't have to be on site. We have customers all over that you know, we're servicing from a central location. We can log into that equipment. Obviously, our engineers can see how that equipment is performing, can see how the code is. They can push live updates. They can help you troubleshoot, ultimately get you back up and running. But if you have a typical, let's say, you know, plumbing-related failure or electrical-related failure, with our guidance and support, we're leveraging your local contractors. And I tell people, I mean, HVAC is a big part of that. You need to lean on and have a good source for HVAC service and support. Have a local electrician that you work with, et cetera. Don't lean on your controls entity to have to book a flight and show up if they're coming out of Canada or the Netherlands or Texas or wherever their home base might be. Again, what we try to do from that to eliminate downtime is give you these options with a lot of redundancies such that one single point of failure isn't a critical failure that puts you in a downtime. On the environmental side, let's have multiple sensors in that space. Let's recognize sensor failures, kick them out, and alert the growers so that, you know, that sensor failure isn't causing issues within the space. Again, you could go on and on and on about that, but our goal is just to, you know, again, through automation and through robust hardware, there's a lot of ways to mitigate downtime.
So 24 hours a day, we can have a service call. Hey, there's an issue, the system's down, or what's the frequency?
I mean, yeah. So we use a support app. I mean, you know, and so from our perspective, we found that that's the best way to go about it. You don't have to submit a ticket. You're going to have direct access to a lot of our support staff, but there's an app that we set up all of our customers on. They're going to message through that app, and then a team of people from Rhythm will jump in and start to support. We understand the priority and the critical nature of things, and ultimately, you know, if it's Christmas Day, if it's in the middle of the night, in the middle of the night stuff, honestly, it's few and far between. And a lot of our systems, you'd be shocked at how little support we have. You know, first 4 to 6 weeks, we spend a lot of time training, and we want that. But, you know, a properly designed system that's easy and intuitive, we teach them how to maintain it, and those support calls start to really diminish, and we've seen that a lot as an organization. But at the end of the day, we're known for service and support. You know, we've got a great team that does that. We've got a team of experts because we design and build everything in-house, so it is our core competency, what we sell. And again, we understand the priority and dedicate a team to jump in to get on
Awesome.
top of that.
Thank you, Kel. Wally, how about you guys?
Yeah, well said, I must say, because we echo a lot of that same stuff. You know, we don't build in so much redundancy, but we have a lot of readily available equipment. As Dosatron, we have been distributing these pumps, and we keep a large volume of pumps and equipment in stock in Florida. It's all readily accessible, and due to the way we've distributed things for many years, we have things in very easy to use, user-friendly kits where things are very much field replaceable. On site by an individual person, much like you said, it can be a local contractor. Many times with the pumps, it can even be someone within the grow. We also keep remote access available to the controllers so that we can be accessed in the same way. We have a support button right on the thing. You hit it, and it sends messages straight to our development team to dig into issues like this and make sure that anything that happens gets fixed very quickly.
I'm going to steal that from you.
Very much the lifeblood of the facility.
I love it. Cultivators, let's talk about what challenges do you guys see with any of the systems out there? Is there anything that you guys would like to bring up as far as these are the big things that we've always get frustrated around, or anything that you want to bring up there?
Sensor calibration.
Which sensor?
Everything but Arroyo.
Now, let's unpack this a little bit, because all jokes aside, calibration is probably one of the most frustrating things that we go through in the grow room every day. So what is the solution here? I don't fully know the answer to this, but I don't know, guys. Like, let's talk about this because this is a real topic that everybody's frustrated with, and most farmers are not calibrating enough. Mike.
Don't cheap out on your sensors. You know, I've been in so many rooms where there's a $10 hygrometer off of Amazon, and the growers using that as like the golden truth on some of the decisions they're making. And you know, the terrible part about that is you can invest in $100,000 control systems. You can have the best control systems on the market, but if the control system's not getting good data, you're not going to get good results.
So cover your sensors when you're spraying.
Please do.
Also, I mean, I think redundancy is good when it comes to sensors as well, right? So I think, you know, having multiple sensor companies in a room is helpful, right? So you can compare data against them, like see how in line they are, or if they're not in line, and be able to track things that way as well.
You know, I know for me in the past, Arroyo I have is kind of a backup to look at stuff. I've got a separate controller for environmental, and then on top of that, I have a handheld that I take into the rooms when I feel that it's not right. And look, sensor placement is a massive thing.
Airflow.
Yep. So, and then, you know, look, it can kind of get a little distracting too when you start looking at all this data and you're trying to figure out what's actually good and what's bad. And I think it can really confuse a lot of growers. It can lead people to start making some, you know, bad decisions.
That's crucial, right? Especially more cultivators are adopting under canopy lights like Faven, and when you start to increase that water transpiration rates in your room, you're gonna need better water balance, you're gonna need more airflow, better sensors, maybe even putting a sensor down under canopy, right, to manage that VPD down there to see if you don't have enough airflow. So a lot of cool tricks and tips that I've seen out there with inner canopy airflow systems, and more to come on that.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to mention something as far as the, you know, fail-safes and stuff. Anytime that you can deploy a full feedback system, so when we're controlling something, there needs to be a result, right? So, for example, if we're turning an exhaust fan on in a greenhouse, if we have an airflow sensor that tells us, hey, it came on or off, that's the full feedback that says, hey, we called for an action, and then there's a response, something that measures that the action actually happened. This is one of the reasons that, for me, substrate sensors were a game changer, because it's the only sensor that's directly reading something that's going on with the plant. I mean, other than if we're looking at like IR sensors or psychometers or any of that other stuff, but commercially deployed, it's going to be the one that is showing, hey, my plant is drinking, my plant isn't drinking. And there's a lot of times that I'm looking at a chart, and maybe I'm only looking at the water content chart, and I see transpiration rates were way down one day. All right, well, let's go look at light levels. Let's go look at the other things that might have caused the plant to react that way. And that's a great example of how full feedback gives you insight that necessarily, just on or off doesn't.
Closed loop, right? Let's confirm. Let's validate.
Yeah, we do. If I could, Arroyo is one of those that we always advocate for, and we've got some really cool things on our roadmap, but it's the same thing that we do with things like flow meters and batch tanks. There's a lot of solutions that are out there that are valve controls. You fill a batch tank, now there's water in the tank. Does the control system even know if there's water in the tank? There's some other things, that overfill and dry run protection that you can do if you don't have that, but just opening a valve, there's no verification, there's no closed loop feedback as to whether or not those plants actually got fed. Was the valve failed, et cetera. Arroyo's one way to prove that. We put flow meters on everything. The flow meter, our system will know exactly what zone it's feeding, what flow rates should be, right? And when I open that valve, yes, there's water moving, and yes, it's moving at the flow rate that it should be moving at. And if it's not, there's some things that can be logged or alerted against for that. So that closed loop feedback's a big part of it. And again, more tools in your arsenal, like Arroyo, ultimately the more risk mitigation that comes of that. On the sensor calibration thing, with that's an interesting thing because control systems only operate as good as the sensors that are providing it data. Right? So it doesn't matter if it's fertigation side of things where it's pH or EC sensors. pH and EC sensors need to be cleaned and calibrated. pH sensors are wearable items. They will eventually need to be replaced. The sensors that we use are CoNNect sensors. They're very robust, reliable sensors. They will tell you when it's time to replace them, but you will have to replace them. Get in a good routine of cleaning and calibrating your sensors, because your fertigation system's only as good as the sensors that are providing it feedback, and that's no different on the environmental control side. We've gone through a lot of different sensors. We've let customers drive them. We're now using an apogee sensor, fully aspirated temperature, humidity, CO2, VPD, PAR, and pressure that we get out of that sensor. And at times we put more than one sensor manufacturer in there, or we leave that flexibility to say, hey, this operation really would benefit from a return air sensor or a supply air sensor as well. And we try to build systems that allow for that ongoing, upgrades or whatever might come from that facility. But yeah, I mean, checking what we're doing. One of the things with Arroyo is we can bring their sensor in. Great sensor, a lot of great reputation from a climate perspective. Well, now we can bring that in, and we're actually building in some tools where you can benchmark sensors, and they'll auto-calibrate themselves against what you feel as a cultivator is your most reliable sensor. So those are things in our roadmap to just kind of piggyback on all of those.
To go off on that too, I think you hit an important point. And yes, the control systems are important. Yes, the sensors are important, but your SOPs to run your business have to be in line with those control systems and how they work, right? So as long as those two worlds can collide and there's ways to manage the processes in which those controls or sensors are being used, that is the recipe for success, right?
You cannot manage without measurement. So yes, absolutely, man. Those SOPs are crucial. And obviously if your team is not able to adopt those, this is where you got to scale back, right? Maybe we're not doing the basics good enough, right? And I think that's really where, if we can get the next slide, please, that'll lead right into the how do we either build or what are we retrofitting, right? So what are these things? I think it starts with team competency and facility competency as well. I think one of those biggest challenges that we've seen is power and limitation of airflow. So as we start to go through those processes, Mo, can you touch a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, I think number one, it's people. I think it's making sure that they're in those right positions to check those things, right? So making sure that you have, again, the right SOPs, the right people in place. I have, one of my biggest things that I was driven on for such a long time was to make sure that the people that are working with me and on my teams are very well trained on our Arroyo system and our control systems. Right, so it's just more than one person looking at these things, and we can spot errors and how those things work, right? So if a DHU goes down, we can see spikes in the graph, and all of a sudden we're like, hey, what happened there? Was there a breaker that popped? Did that DHU go out? Is there a board that's bad, right? Sorry, that was off to a tangent. What was the original question?
No, that's good. I think it starts with people, right? What are some of these things that you do to build out or retrofit? But ultimately, if you don't have the right team in place, and I think that's one thing, because, Mo, actually, I'm glad you asked that. When you start going through how to build a team, right, what are some of those things that you look for with people that are running the irrigation room or running the climate? Like, I know you're managing multiple facilities with a lot of oversight, but what do you look for when you're hiring that team?
When I'm hiring and interviewing question, I think a lot of it is just on, number one, I think my most successful employees have been from the restaurant industry. I feel like I get a lot of people from the restaurant industry that I find trends that are really good at staying organized and taking orders and kind of following the processes. So I look to see how capable they are of following the processes, right? I think that's one of the biggest things. I think the grow knowledge, that stuff's general now. We can teach that, right? I think being tech savvy to a degree with the way cannabis is going. There's more. It's not a pick up a pot type feel thing, right? It's have you checked graphs today, or what are those drybacks looking back? What's the EC and the substrate doing? And then we're making decisions based on those things, right? So, I think I veered off again.
You did. That was great. Thank you, Mo. And ultimately, if they care, right? Skills can be trained. Do they actually give a fuck about what they're doing? Do they care, right? So you got to manage that expectation properly. You got to train and make sure that people are following through on their commitments. Because if they're not, they don't care. Time to go.
Sorry, my bad. And so in regards to this question, like the way that the command center and the control systems helps is against, we just recently took over a facility that didn't have any type of control system. They were using thermostats on the walls. There was no Arroyo that was inside there, and so in order to figure out what it is that we need to do in these rooms and be able to see the changes that we need to make infrastructurally. We need to look at the data and say, okay, yes, this room can't get below 65% humidity or 70%, or they hit the marks that I needed to hit. So now I'm looking at this data saying, okay, I see the patterns. It can't get colder at night. I need to add more AC. I need to add DU. And that's when I start retrofitting the building based on going through a run or two at the spot, being able to see what its true capabilities are, right? And then that's when you start making changes to the infrastructure and making decisions on how much you need or what you need, and take it from there.
That's it. You got to get. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm just going to reiterate with Mo here. I think the people is probably one of the best resources that you can have for success. I've been into places that had ungodly amounts of money that they had dumped into it, and it was at waste without the right people operating it, without the right people making the decisions on how to make the best out of the limitations they had available.
I'm going to piggyback on that just briefly. You just hit a point that I was on a podcast recently. We talked about that specifically, which was I'll teach people how to grow. You know, you need to have that technical acumen and whatnot. But I kind of referenced one of the best cultivators, operations teams that I worked with. But this lead guy that they had mechanical, electrical, and plumbing licenses. Had no clue how to grow. They taught him that, and he ended up being like one of the, I mean, there was never a situation, downtime, things like that. He had the expertise there, and he taught him how to grow. And then good facilities that I've worked with as well hire really talented cultivators, and then they'll hire an operations guy who works directly with the cultivations team, but he's maintaining, keeping up with the equipment and all of those sorts of things. And those two together, and again, hire good, driven people, follow processes, etc. Teach them how to grow. You need to have that lead guy there, but I think that was just a good thing to hit on for sure.
You know, I think a lot of the times we forget a lot of what we're doing. You know, we're putting a certain amount of water into those rooms. We have to be able to remove a certain amount of water out of those rooms. You know, we're introducing a certain amount of heat into those rooms. We have to be able to remove the heat from those rooms. So at the end of the day, you know, you can't fight physics. And I think a lot of people get into trouble, you know, trying to push, you know, I want to be able to have this desired outcome. Well, it's like, you know, you can't do it this way. You know, we've got to really try and keep, you know, we always want to make sure we're keeping things in balance, light, temperature, humidity, right? Achieve those desired consistent outcomes. And, you know, sometimes you just can't introduce as many plants as you want. You're going to take lights out, or, you know, DHU is the biggest issue, not being able to feed a certain way. You don't have enough zones, or, you know.
Yeah, we hear that. We have that a lot because they think that we can fix things with automation. And at times I'm like, you don't have the mechanical infrastructure to get to where you want to be. And there's no amount of automation that's going to do it. What we just try to do is allow for, when you need to make those changes to get there, to have a control system that can adapt to those new changes.
I think that's one thing that's really cool now is that there's just so many resources out there from all of these control companies and sensor companies that, you know, again, this comes down to physics, right? There needs to be certain VPDs and different phases of the plant's life that we need to obtain in order to get maximum growth, to get maximum yield. So, you know, I hear a lot of people, a lot of clients when I walk in there for the first time, you know, I have this equipment. I was promised to hit this, you know, I thought I was going to hit a bunch of weight just because I have this equipment. Well, it's like, yeah, you got some badass equipment, but, you know, you need to know how to drive it, right? You need to know how to, like, what this actually means. And then, again, back to the SOPs and then back to the people. And
You know, to what you were harping on before, I mean, it really becomes down to facilities management at scale. And again, to kind of really get these consistent desired results, it's you have to have the systems in place to be able to do what you want to do. And again, it's just, you know, it comes back to data, it comes back to control, and it comes down to the ability to actually be able to do it, so, and execute.
Yeah, and I see a lot of the same stuff. You know, the robustness in SOP, again, along with a robust system, allows the best facilities to continue to run fluidly.
Yeah, and so I've talked a few times about the law of minimums. It's this old bucket, if you will. It's got staves on it, and being able to identify what your most limiting variable is, and especially in a retrofitting build, is going to be the first place that you want to start. Right? In a retro build, there's usually many things that need to be addressed. The most effective way to get started, to get rocking and rolling, start working on the ones that are most restrictive. Right? If you just can't grow enough plants because you don't have the dehume capacity, you got to knock that one off the list first. Right? And the thing is the more equal any of our resources are, the more efficient we're going to be, right? So if we go overkill in part of the build, that doesn't make up for being restricted by a minimum on some other aspect in the build.
Mo, what were the first two things that we did when we took over Gen X and really said, hey, these are the two things that we need to do?
Arroyo immediately. That was the number one. Oh, and always more dehumidification. Always, yeah, always. I think, again, it goes back to education. Like I said, there's so much good resources out there. The sensor data is great. Having amazing control is great. If you don't know what to do with them, so what?
We've had these panel discussions with Andon, Kirk from Andon. We've had like a couple about water balance and how important water balance is. 6 pints per plant per day is a pretty good number for transpiration rates. So if you don't have enough dehumidification based on your planting density, it's time to scale back, right? Reduce your plant count.
Also learning your equipment and knowing that the efficiency of the dehumidification is going to drop as temperature drops, and also keeping that in mind and getting redundancy to make sure that you're calculating for, those environmental changes that happen over the next 9 weeks.
And if you don't know those efficiency ratings based on the VPD change, you need to understand that because that will impact everything. Let's get to the next slide, Tony. All right, so questions from the audience. This is a great opportunity if you have any questions, concerns, opportunities that you might be dealing with in your own farm. Anything you guys might want to bring up?
Come on, don't be shy.
I got one over here. All right, name him.
Are you guys working on any sensors for runoff, for measurement, pH, and EC?
Yeah, so Roya, this year we were announcing what's called the drip and drain station. So it can collect runoff, and it'll give you both the volume and the EC and temperature of the runoff. I'm not sure how to use temperature yet for your runoff, but the volume and the EC are going to be pretty valuable when we start talking about reducing waste, making crop steering decisions so we know when we hit field capacity. Do we need more runoff, less runoff in order to balance out pHs, ECs, that type of stuff. So yeah, if you want to, you can check them out at the booth. It's the Roy booth right over there.
Why can't we measure pH in that sensor?
It doesn't have a pH sensor in it.
Why can't we put a pH sensor in it?
Well, you can. And one of the challenges with pH sensors is you have to spend a lot in order to get an industrial one that doesn't require daily calibration. Daily is most recommended. For any of our cheaper Hanna, Blue Labs, Apura instruments, I'm going to calibrate that thing pretty much any time I use it, fresh the first time that day. It's a very sensitive instrument, right? We're looking at a permeable piece of glass that's detecting the number of hydrogen ions in a solution, right? If that thing dries out, it's probably done. If that thing gets beat up too much at all, it's not going to be worth it. So you got to be looking at like spending $800, $1,000, $1,500 on an industrial pH sensor, and some of those they'll actually be good to not calibrate for up to a month, based on as long as they stay wet and those other requirements.
I will say this, that inside of Arroyo, for those of you who haven't used it or don't use it on a daily basis, there are a bunch of measurement recording, I'd say tasks or recordings that you could take, right? There's so many different categories from tracking plant height and how much stretch is happening over time, to transpiration at the leaf surface, to pH levels. So that data is still able to get tracked and graphed. So as long as you have the tool, right, and you have those SFPs, all those things are still available there as well.
The biggest single challenge with measuring runoff like that, and pH specifically, is that those probes cannot dry out, right? So you have to keep them in a submerged place. Collecting runoff in that capacity and the minimal volumes of runoff that we're collecting becomes a serious challenge to keep accuracy. If we're looking at a 100 mil section and we're only turning that over every couple hours because our runoff is minimum, we're just looking at the same value all the time.
The first system, honestly, that we ever did was an underground facility in California in 2014, and they wanted us to measure all the runoff volume, pH, and EC. And And we did it. I mean, they collected at the room level. We did it, and then we reused their runoff as a nutrient addition at that room level as well. It was a unique facility. I mean, I hadn't seen anything like that, but in terms of what they wanted. And they put some pumps in the room, and then we pumped that back through sensors. It took measurements. We moved it over to a basin. We were taking all the measurements that they wanted and data logging all of that stuff. It really wasn't effective to do in most facilities. And honestly, what they've got is a great new tool. And from our perspective, we've been a lot of the runoff sensing stuff, especially if you wanted to do it at the bench level, it's cost prohibitive. We played with putting paddle wheel sensors in to take measurements of runoff. So a little P-trap, putting a paddle wheel sensor. There's a lot of ways that you can approach it. It becomes cost prohibitive. And the ways that growers want it today, most of them don't have the capital to put that forth in the midst of the investment that is a robust automation solution that can handle that. I think it's coming. And I think Arroyo's is a great initial launch of that and how they deploy it wirelessly on all of that. But certainly when it does, we're gonna bring that to life in our systems. But we don't design sensors. We are automation focused. We like to leverage the best. We like to integrate to partner companies like Apogee, et cetera. I just see that in the roadmap, and we're gonna get some more cost-effective solutions for it.
I just want to stir their pot a little bit. Why check runoff when you have EC sensors in your substrate? I know the answer, but I'd like to kind of ask Joe, Jason.
Over time, I've found that sensor placement, like substrate can dry out, or there's an air pocket, or things can kind of happen. So sometimes those values can kind of drift off from where you think you are. For me, I'm always looking at runoff in addition to my EC in the substrate. More so, like I'm trying to achieve a certain amount of runoff every day. If I know it, to me, pH isn't as relevant as a number if I'm pushing enough runoff, honestly. So.
Well, and I think it really comes back to that feedback loop, right? I mean, that's the most important reason to have it, is because when we're checking all these measurements in the block and we're seeing the block, placement within the block makes a big difference. To be able to verify that we're getting the volume of runoff we expect to, we're hitting the field capacity we think, and that the EC is coming out, or we're rinsing or containing more EC.
Yeah, I mean, redundancy is probably going to be the best thing there. It's just a sanity check, right? If we start seeing weird numbers in the block, then hey, let's take a look at that runoff numbers so we can get an idea of how to approach the issue.
No, I was going to say one other thing too. I'm trying to achieve no runoff in my P2s. So we're measuring runoff twice a day. So I'm like specifically trying to achieve a zero runoff during my P2s. So that's kind of one thing that Arroyo can tell you the EC, right? But it's not necessarily telling you how much runoff you're pushing during that time window.
What about you, Mo? Anything to add to that?
Redundancy. I think that's the biggest thing, right? I did have a question though. Something that maybe you guys is up for discussion. Just what are you looking for as far as substrate EC versus runoff EC? Do you expect differences between the two? Generally, what are you looking for as far as like volume goes in comparison to that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, my strategy is actually the same as Joe's, where I try not to have any runoff with P2s. Typically, no advantage to it, right? If I need corrective action with my with runoff, then I'll do that at the end of the P1 section, right? I like to run as little as pH as possible when people ask me, the least amount of runoff as possible, because all I really need is enough for a pH check, right? If everything's perfect, then I don't need to push extra irrigation water through, right? I'm not trying to fix EC, not trying to fix pH. That's going to do nothing for me. And so when we think about differences between EC readings in the substrate and in runoff, you will usually see them just a little bit different. And that's just going to be due to the way that, how much have we irrigated, right? So typically salts, as long as we feed the plants sufficiently or more than sufficiently, which is where we always want to be. We never want to underfeed the plants. It's a waste of money, waste of time, waste of energy. Doesn't work. So when we think about the salts actually concentrating in the block because we're supplying more than the plant needs, which is a great way to help keep those nutrients balanced. Then when we do run and push some runoff, sometimes it's going to be a little bit higher in the block, sometimes it's going to be a little bit lower than in the block. So for me, I personally don't spend a lot of energy analyzing runoff ECs. So for me, the biggest advantage is that redundancy check, that sanity check. Just gives me another sensor that says, hey, everything else is reading in line.
Look, I think more so too, it's all about trends rather than that exact, snapshot in time. Because if over the course of a week we're starting to see our runoff EC climbing, that's a pretty good indication that, like, hey, we need to be pushing a little bit more water if we're trying to maintain that EC in the substrate, right? So, I think, look, it's always great to have that, but again, I think it's part of a bigger picture and really looking at trends and where we're trying to go.
pH levels as well. I mean, pH is very important. Just seeing what the plant's doing or what's happening in the lines, if there's any variation from one zone to another zone, if everything is consistently at a 5.8 pH and you see something at a 6.7 or a 4.2 in one zone, it happens, right? I've had places where I was consulting with that they had a solenoid broke that was connected to another room while they were cleaning the lines with green clean acid. And the way that we found out something had happened with the solenoid that went to the other room that fed green clean acid to the plants had a horrible pH level in the substrate. And I immediately saw that on the runoff checks and was like, hey, why is this pH way blown off? And they're like, I don't know. Go check with the irrigation, what's feeding. And, you find out your mistakes through things like that,
Yeah, and
It
this
was not pretty.
This is actually kind of going to loop us back to the second subject of today's is, all right, genetics steering for success. The best thing that you can do is get comprehensive and organized crop registration information, right? Any of this data information, really it's just a form of automatic crop registration when we look at it in the big picture. It's high resolution crop registration. Yes, there's lots of things out there that there's not great sensors out there for, or we do have to take manual measurements in order to get the crop registrations. For me, really the two most important crop registration points are looking at plant height and runoff pH. Runoff pH is something that without tissue analysis, I can't necessarily get a good idea of if my nutrient balance is staying correctly, right? Are my cations and anions staying balanced in solution? Do we have the right elements in sufficient supply to keep the plant from having a deficiency? So that's one reason that pH is very, very important for me. And then plant height, as far as crop registration, is very important because that's how we start dictating some of our crop steering strategies, especially when we're working with a new genetic that we may not have a lot of background on as far as the most successful ways to grow it. So yeah, that's kind of on the line of pH and wrapping things back around to our second subject.
I'm just going to jump in, not on the crop steering side, but the fact that he mentioned that he had a solenoid valve failure that resulted in the wrong product or a cleaning agent going to the wrong room. That is completely preventable with the right control systems. Okay, having multiple layers of valves, valve transfers, etc., mainline pressurized to all your feeding zones, you are going to eventually have that problem. There are ways to build an infrastructure where you can eliminate those failures. There are now valves that are open are to the market, Imperium being one of them, that are just meant to be more reliable and eliminate those failures. What Rhythm does is we make sure that we have room transfer solenoids, and then we have downstream feeding zones. There must be two layers of failures for it to happen. Our systems will also recognize flow rates and flow rate indifferences. I hear that problem a lot in this industry, where it is, oh man, it took us 3 days before we realized that a veg zone was feeding due to a faulty solenoid, and they didn't recognize that. So there are ways to mitigate that. Our control systems certainly have all of those in our standard designs. And then again, we monitor all of the flow rates so that I can recognize indifferences and flag the users that, hey, I'm supposed to be feeding this zone, but I have a flow rate that's a little bit different, and just kind of pointing to those directions. Our systems will auto pressurize. We'll make sure pressure drops to make sure, just again, that we don't have failures before we start feeding. So there's ways to mitigate that risk, certainly, and I hear that a lot, so I figured I'd hit on that.
I think this is one reason that I'm really excited about doing more integration stuff with controls companies, specifically like Rhythm, is because when we think about full feedback, well, if we're supposed to be irrigating, then the water content should be rising in the substrate. If we're not supposed to be irrigating, then the water content shouldn't be rising in the substrate. And I think that's just another example of a way that can be identified.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of those, an autonomous pumping system, if you have a valve failure in that location, will pump everything that it can to that valve failure location. right? And if you don't have a system with that closed loop feedback, your Arroyo system might flag, like, what's going on? But our systems are just designed to constantly recognize those things. Again, we depressurize, so it's not possible to feed a wrong zone when Rhythm has control of that pumping system. I know when it's supposed to run, we tell that pump to run, and then we ramp it up and maintain the pressures, we monitor the flow rates, et cetera. But yeah, you have a lot of risk if you do not have a system that is properly, infrastructure that's properly designed, closed loop feedback through flow meters or whatever. There's always that potential for a failure point to cause something potentially catastrophic, or maybe it's just, hey, I pumped 1,000 gallons to a room that I didn't mean to. But at the end of the day, it's all able to be overcome or eliminated, those risks, just through proper infrastructure.
Does Rhythm have alerts on phone apps? You get text alerts or a Rhythm app, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it's email, text alerts that are all configurable. You can set up the users. You can set up, to email or text to email is what it's called. And then we're actually in development of an alert-specific app right now. But certainly there's an awful lot of alerts that can be configured. You can turn on or off certain alerts and select the ones that you consider priority to text or email.
I live off my Arroyo alerts. I live off them.
And on that note, that's going to wrap up our panel over here, guys. A round of applause for our panelists. Thank you guys for joining us. And don't forget to join us tonight at the Nerd at 8 p.m. We're going to have the Substrate Showdown panel, wrapping up the community panel series. So much love, guys. We'll see you there.